Hi, everybody. Ron Placone here, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the film Shadows of Liberty, which is a film that I saw tonight. There was a screening of it that was sponsored in part by Radio Free Nashville, the radio station that is the home station to my morning show, the Indie Bohemians morning show, and also Nashville Veterans for Peace, and a couple other different groups sponsored the screening. What's going on with that film? The film Shadows of Liberty talks about the corruption within the U.S. media. It talks about how the media will cover up certain things, how the media picks and chooses what they decide to inform the public about based on the corporate interests that they have, because the media, of course, is very corporate. In fact, just a handful of very, very large corporations control virtually everything that people see and hear. That's why media reform is a big topic that I talk about on my radio show, on my YouTube channel, and is something that I talk about at colleges. And it's been an issue that's been a pretty big part of my life that I feel very strongly about, and something that I really think is currently changing within the United States. The media structure is shifting based on public behavior, and I strongly feel that that needs to continue. But anyway, so that film covers those topics pretty in-depthly. And worldwide, this film was very, very well received. It won awards in Berlin, and it just played all over the world at red carpet events, at film festivals, etc. Here in the United States, the film did not get as much attention. It did not get into any film festivals at all. And, you can kind of speculate why that may or may not be, but one thing that cannot be ignored is the fact that when you're challenging powers that be in the manner that this film does, keep in mind a lot of these corporations do have a role in the film festivals. They are some of the bigger sponsors for a lot of the bigger film festivals in the United States. So it's not terribly surprising that maybe a film like this wouldn't necessarily be welcomed with open arms. And when I spoke to the director, Jean-Philippe, he did point that out. He wasn't saying, oh, that's definitely why we didn't get in or anything like that. He was just saying, well, you can't help but notice when this is our topic matter and a lot of these corporations are involved with the film festivals, well, can't help but notice it. So anyway, a woman named Deborah Brown, who is the outreach coordinator for the film, organized a 50-state tour, or I guess a nationwide tour. I don't really, but a nationwide tour screening the film, and it was sponsored by different organizations, different media action groups, different community radio stations, different educational institutions, and the film screened tonight. And overall, I really enjoyed it. It's a topic matter that I'm into, so I appreciated that. But a few things about the film. First of all, went over several case studies as to why having a corporate media structure such as ours is problematic. You can't just say, we have a corporate media, isn't that bad? You kind of need to say why. And they pointed out some reasons why. They pointed to a situation where CBS was beginning to uncover something involving Nike and some of their corrupt labor practices, some of their exploitation of their workers, and they completely pushed this journalist's story under the rug because it turns out they had made a deal with Nike. So they pretty much just completely vaulted this woman's story and refused to air it because they made a deal with Nike. They talked about how the Bush administration's war propaganda, which essentially is what it was pretty much just parroted and copied and pasted by the media at large. They talked about a case where somebody exposed something unethical a certain corporation was doing, and then that was pushed under the rug as well. I don't want to go into too many specifics on a lot of the cases they went over, because I do want to encourage people to go see the film for themselves. But they pretty much set up the case where most journalists now kind of know how completely screwed up the corporate media is, and how it's a situation where it's almost impossible to do your job as a journalist, and it just brings the basic question: how can we expect a media to hold the powers that be accountable when that media is controlled by the powers that be? I mean, it's just a basic, tragically flawed system. They talked a lot about media policy as well, and something that was very fascinating to me that I often forget about when I'm speaking at colleges about these issues. This is something that I am guilty of overlooking. They talked about how it all started out as a gift in many ways. And that gift was the Communications Act back in the 30s, because this was when broadcasting was pretty much just starting to build some momentum. Broadcasting was pretty much becoming nationwide, and people were tuning into the radio. I mean, it was during the Great Depression, millions and millions and millions of people were listening to the radio. It was a powerful entity. The advertising dollars were starting to roll in. And it was, the government was going to oversee the airwaves because somebody had to regulate it. There had to be some kind of regulation. And they were prodded by these broadcasters to make it a for-profit system. They could have not done that. They could have said, no, of course, this can't be a profit. That would corrupt the integrity of informing a populace, right? And when you think about a lot of the history of the United States, that goes against a lot of these supposed principles of this country. But instead, they went the for-profit route. And they said, okay, you guys, you like the advertisers, here you go. And that act, back in the Communication Act of 34, pretty much solidified we are going to have a for-profit media system. And then over the years, they highlighted other policy things. When Reagan approved of General Electric and that merger with NBC, later on the Telecommunications Act in 1996 that Clinton signed, that pretty much lifted all the regulations on big media entities. In 2011, there was the whole instance with Powell wanting to say that one media couldn't own the television, the radio, and the newspaper. And in 2011, that was that they could do that. Powell wanted to do that. In 2011, that was overturned. However, Fox News has an exemption to that they've had since 1993. It went over the kind of policy timeline, and you see how it all just started out with this gift. And that gift was the Communication Act of 1934 that said, yes, we can have a for-profit system. And then it just escalated. It's worse now than it was in the 60s. Media consolidation kept consolidating more and more. It kept getting worse. The regulations kept getting looser and looser. It started as, oh, you can be for profit. Then it was, oh, of course you can merge. Then it was, oh, you know what? There's no regulations on how many stations one entity can own in a given market. And then it was like, oh, well, wait a second. You can own everything. You can have the television, the radio, the newspaper. Yeah, that's okay. Even though the public doesn't want this, we're going to go ahead and okay it because, my dad's Colin Powell, whatever. And the court says, oh, I don't think you're acting in the public interest here. But Fox News says, well, we have an exemption, right? Of course you do. You're Fox News. You're fair and balanced. So it's interesting when you think about that perspective, and sometimes I overlook that historical policy lens. I don't think how it really did just kind of start out as that gift. I mean, this whole thing. When you think about media policy, at least in the contemporary sense, you think about Telecommunications Act in 96 is a pretty good case study. You think about stuff like net neutrality, and you don't always think to just go back to the beginning and be like, wow, it all started out as a gift. It all started out as a gift, pretty much giving private industry the airwaves, pretty much saying, here you go, take them, use them for what you want, and if profit's your main concern, all right, go ahead and profit. And now we have a media whose pretty much only concern is profit. In fact, there's footage in the movie too of one of the Murdochs. It wasn't Rupert Murdoch. I guess it was one of his kids or something, saying that the only incentive is profit. The only true path to independence is profit. And it's not surprising how, when you look at decisions that were made early on in regards to the airwaves, why we have the media structure that we have now. But certainly not the media structure that was ever intended for this country. When you think about people like Tom Paine, when you think about people like Thomas Jefferson, this was certainly not the media structure that they envisioned. This was not the media structure that would be healthy to a democratic society at all. And then the film goes into that too. They go into a lot of the historical context, which is something that I talk a lot about on my show, and I talk a lot about at colleges. I mean, before, prior to the 20th century, we had a media structure where subsidies encouraged different groups of people to start newspapers. The government would subsidize postage costs so that an entity, a school of political thought or anything like that, could have their own newspaper. That's why constitutionalists, federalists, socialists, all these groups had their own newspapers that were distributed and distributed well. And an average metropolitan area had about 10 different newspapers. Now, most metropolitan areas have one, maybe. So this is not the media structure that was ever intended, but because of some of those decisions in the 30s, that's why we have what we have now. And it's kind of a heavy topic to think about, but I do think that better times are ahead because I think the public is changing their habits. But that's kind of a different day for a different video. I don't want to get into all that right now. But for all intents and purposes, I think Shadows of Liberty, if you want to kind of get a good visual crash course about what media reform is all about why there's a media reform movement, about why this issue is so important right now and why it is so timely and why it is so essential to the United States, especially. I think it's a really great film to watch to get a pretty good crash course on those issues and why they're so important. So yeah, Shadows of Liberty. To learn more about that, shadowsofliberty.org. This is Ron Placone signing out.